you so much for coming. Yeah, I'm going to talk about trauma today. So the first thing I want to say is everything stays in this room. Just imagine you're in Vegas. Because I'm really open to people. Can you hear me now? Okay, thank you. So the first thing is that this has to be very confidential, because I really hope that people will tell their own stories, because that's really how we learn so much. And so everybody's agreed to that? Okay, just nod your head. Okay, okay, great. Okay, so first of all, the reason that I specialize in the book is going around. Do the next one, slide. I was able to write this book was because initially I was practicing in Kitsilano. I had a clinic there as a naturopathic physician, and someone called from the Archdiocese of Vancouver and said, we have a person here that's been sexually abused by a priest, and she will not take drugs. So I said, oh, sure, because I had done some previous work with people when I lived in Nova Scotia who were psychologists and sexologists and very innovative. And so she came, and from there, no one knew in the 80s how to treat trauma. Now it's, there's so many different people that are treating trauma, but back then nobody knew. And so I got, medical doctors, psychologists, naturopathic doctors, social workers. I just had a whole slew of people that were referring to me. So my practice became very big, and I started to do, as well as one-to-one, I would do workshops on Galliano. And there I can go into that later, but that's also in the book. I developed something called the womb exercise, which was really helpful for people who had been abused by the system in terms of the sexual abuse, but medical abuse. And so, yeah, go ahead. So anyways, those are my degrees, and you can keep going. So both my parents had PTSD. My mother was orphaned and came from Scotland. And my father, as I say, from war, he was in World War II in the Navy. Oh, I have to eat it. Okay, how's that? And the other part that he was traumatized was he found his first wife in bed with another naval officer. So both of them, I experienced that as growing up. And then I was sexually assaulted at 16, and that changed my plans. I really wanted to be an actor, but as many of us do in the health professions, I chose a profession that I would be able to also learn how to heal myself. So next, yeah, you can just keep doing it. So the PTS, and the reason that it doesn't say PTSD is because the vets didn't like being called that it's a disorder. It's what happens, it's not, so they felt much more comfortable saying it's post-traumatic stress. And it's really unresolved psychological trauma. It's a deep, lingering emotion that just doesn't feel good. And it can be slight to severe, including suicidal ideation, which means you've got suicidal thoughts. And it's dependent on several factors, of course, and that's really how you treat someone. A lot is building up their resilience. And it may not be expressed. Like, I remember this woman, she never told anybody about being raped when she was young until she was on her deathbed, because she just had to get it out. So it's very important for all of us to express what we feel inside, because that's, so many pathways inside of us that just the brain can't cope with knowing many things that are harmful for us. And we're always trying to get centered, better, happy, healthy. So I know that I don't want to dwell on the science, because we want to get to what works. But I think it's also really important that science is not difficult. People say, it's not difficult when you think about it. I'm going to try to make it really easy. And if it's not easy by the end of this lecture, please let me know. But really what happens, has everybody heard of the amygdala? Okay, so the amygdala is part of the primitive brain, right? And that's where so much of the fear and the anxiety you get triggered, and it becomes overactive. Whereas the prefrontal cortex, which is behind the forehead, that's normally the executive function. That's what organizes. That's what even your aha moments, like there's so many things that come from that, and it becomes underactive. So really you're pulled by the amygdala. It's the one that's triggering you. And then the amygdala signals to the hypothalamus, and that's responds to the autonomic nervous system. I'll get into that, make it very simple for you. And I don't want to get too complicated. Okay, so I'm just going to say cortisol, which is the main stress hormone, that's how it gets released. And there's a whole cascade that happens, but that's as simple as I figured, and as complicated, actually, as I'm going to make it, because I want to get to, okay, so here's the amygdala there's the prefrontal cortex, and we all have this. Okay, and so what I think is really important, and I learned that from my very first patient who came in and said, no, I don't want drugs. And in fact, there's only 2 SSRIs, that Zoloft and Paxil, that are actually approved. But even in these things, you just see people who really, there's so many reasons why not to take drugs. And one is just the authenticity. What are you going through? Can we help you get through what you are instead of being modified by actual drugs that can have so many side effects? This is actually for nightmares right now, studied by neuroscientists. In fact, my first cousin is at Yale, and so we're sort of at opposite ends on this, but it's kind of interesting, I think, that she's studying paroxysm for nightmares. And I think it's better to use homeopathy. Stramonium is a very common one, and botanicals would be scutellaria. You don't need to know all that right now. Just showing you there are alternatives. And yeah, all of these have, I mean, look at this. Anxiety, panic, social phobia, depression, suicide, irritability, difficulty concentrating, anorexia, changes in libido, menstrual irregularities, memory loss, fatigue, seizures, slurred speech, weakness, incontinence, and urinary retention. And most will cause birth defects and pass into breast milk, yet they are often prescribed for pregnant and nursing mothers. And one of the things, forget the symptoms, the toxicity can lead to dementia, because that's one of the major causes of dementia. So we're just trying to get clean in our brain, which has a glymph system which is why sleep is so important, because your brain every night is cleaning itself. And it's, instead of the lymph system, it's the glymph system in the brain. Okay, so the traumatizing experience, it increases the sympathetic system, that's fear, and it decreases the parasympathetic, which is calm, and GABA. So what this does to your body and what you can do to minimize it, what this does to your brain and how to recover peace of mind is really the essence of this lecture. And it's really important to know that one of the aspects for survivors is the shame. Like Tim asked me, can you please talk about your own experience? Well, let me just tell you, I was raped at 16, and I did a solo show in 2017 or 18. It was the first time even my husband, my late husband at the time, said, you never even told me. I was like, really? And really it was because you feel like you've brought that on, which I hadn't at all. But it's just so, I could really relate, shame is just so, it just gets into every cell. And it just makes you feel really bad about yourself. And it's really inhibiting things, and that's why I think I just couldn't go into acting, because I just didn't even want to be in my body. I could hardly go to a dance class. So when this first patient came to me from the Archdiocese, I had a lot of understanding, because what I did is I started dancing. I just danced. Nobody knew why I was dancing, but I was just dancing for years and years to just get back into my body, probably subconsciously. I don't know how much I thought about it, but I knew how much dance, and now for me, singing just brings you out of all those horrible feelings. So I'm always encouraging people, not in practice and in personal life, to be able to write, to be able to dance, to be able to move even to chant. If you're not going to sing, just get in touch with your body. And that's why, here, hang on. This novel came out of the fact that I was going into burnout. I saw so many people who had been sexually abused, and I could hardly go home at night sometimes because it was just in my body. And so I started writing and writing and writing. It didn't even make sense. And then I had to edit it, which was hundreds and hundreds of pages. And I was able to get a novel out of that. There's also a quasi-sequel to it right now that I'm almost finished. And I can't tell you how much, if I hadn't done that, I don't know what would have happened, to be honest. But, just writing is so important. I don't draw or paint, but my daughter does, and I think it's just really, that's another modality that's just so important. I like this one, fear. Forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. It's your choice. A lot of times we say, oh, we just feel sorry for people. Oh, they can't do it. You know what? Every single person can do it. Every person can make a choice to go tip the canoe up, right? And just not stay in that mire. I think that as Canadians, I hope this isn't a terrible thing to say here, but I know there's a lot of people from other countries, but we get into this victim mode. And one of the things I just obviously adored my husband, Avi would say, hey, you're acting like a victim. And then I would say some other time, you're acting like a victim. And we loved it because we called each other out on that. We wanted to be strong. He was an incredible composer. I have his album just to show you. We really wanted to take our work into a realm that was both healing but also, entertaining and that kind of thing. But I am so tired of feeling sorry for people because it diminishes people by doing that. I guess that's my little... Okay, so take charge. Failing to confront this experience, it'll just reduce your quality of life. But by digging in, by mining that experience, you can your whole life really opens up. And in fact, when I performed this solo show, 7 years ago, I was shocked because I had held all that inside. I felt like I don't want to put it in terms of dollars, but I felt like $1 million, $10 million, $1 billion after that because I had all these girlfriends and actually guy friends, and it was out of me. I was able to tell people that happened, and I was able to move on, and it was just really liberating. So now, once you have the traumatizing experience, there's triggers, and these are just intrusive and upsetting memories. And they come in the form of senses. So, the senses, the sight, the image, the smell, the touch, the sound, and even tastes. And once we learn how to understand why someone's really getting upset about something, you're able to take them on a journey. And that's really what I started doing. I would do a lot of visualization with people, and then I did that on Galliano. We just really came together and tried and really understood what this subconscious was trying to say by allowing the senses to come out. And what you see, like if you see a brick wall, when you do kind of more like hypnosis kind of stuff, or guided visualization, like what is that, Shakti Gawan? I wrote a book about she was the first one. Okay. So this is more of a natural approach that I do. And it improves outcomes by optimizing the physiological conditions like the brain and the gut and the blood sugar levels, the hormones, trying to find out food sensitivities. Because if you have food sensitivities, how do you know really that you're reacting to an actual event or you're reacting to some kind of a food? And nobody thinks about that. Nobody really, I guess they are now. It's hard to know. I've been in practice since '87, so. And the other part of it, so this is balancing the biochemistry. And this part is telling or reframing the story. And that's establishing a safe environment to share the story without judgment, allowing the shame to dissipate, and fostering trust and willingness to take risks to facilitate that deeper emotional expression. And through that, it's just really important to me that people find a way to tell their story. But sometimes, going back sometimes to that event is not always helpful for people. And so any type of trauma-informed care should consist of mindfulness and awareness of self and the family dynamics, and address that shame and the suppression without adding more shame. So you're doing it in a healthy and respectful manner. And it's holistic and it's creative, because you're using all parts, the whole, and you're also using all the creative that can come out of us. So that's what I was just saying. That's the naturopathic medicine part, and that's the expressive arts. And it's really important to know that it's not a mental illness, it's a neurological injury, because the brain becomes dysregulated and the brain can be restored. I don't know why I wanted to put that in, but I just put it in. So the symptoms are basically negative changes. When you see someone who's, all of a sudden they've become negative and they're feeling hopeless and they're emotionally numb and they avoid, they self-isolate from people, places, situations, and there's intrusive memories and they're easily startled or set off. You can probably ask them, what's going on. And one of the things in my practice, the first modality that I've used was homeopathy, and I'm sure most of you, is anybody familiar with homeopathy? Does anybody? Oh, great. Oh, good. Wonderful. Okay. I always feel like I have to try to talk about that, but it's so powerful. I found it so powerful. It just allows all parts of a person's self that you can't even imagine. You don't even have to think about, what part of the brain is that, or, Anyways, we could go into that some other time, but, and this is Joanne made me this great, what do you call it?
Word cloud.
A word cloud. So these are all the common symptoms. And to be honest, I could tell you all these things, you could read them. Absolutely any symptom can be traced back or can be presented in someone who has trauma, who's presenting. And a lot of time, of course, the GI disturbance, your gut, you've got headaches, you've got skin disorders. I actually had Graves' disease, and a number of years ago. It was a very, very challenging one, and I learned so much. It's an autoimmune hyperthyroidism. And I even went to a holistic doctor in Los Angeles, and he was a medical doctor, but he was from Germany, and he said, no, you've got to do drugs. And I said, not going to happen. So I was able to regulate myself, calm down, understand the source, which actually was because my daughter was here and she was starting to have children, and I was in Los Angeles and very Irish. I started sucking on melancholy, and once I got that, I wouldn't allow myself to feel the melancholy. Nope, not going to do that. I was able to heal. I was able to take a deep breath. I've always meditated since I was 15. It's sort of my reason that I'm even sane, I think. But anything like insomnia, psychotic episodes, if you work with people who are schizophrenia and that you're able to find out what happened to them, you can heal so much with people. It's just what makes me really excited. Okay, keep going, thanks. And all these things like heart disease, metabolic syndrome, fibromyalgia, eating disorders, autoimmune, cancer, gender dysphoria, addiction, schizophrenia, they all can be traced back to trauma. Just go back one. So, Dr. Hamer, anybody hear of New German medicine? Okay, so this is a German medical doctor whose son, I think it was a car accident, he died. And the Dr. Hamer got cancer, prostate cancer. He said, that's really strange. Why would I? So anyways, he started thousands and thousands of cases. And he realizes that trauma, that feeling of just like panic, you're out of control, is what happened for him. He had in so much grief. And in fact, if you want to listen to, I did a radio play on Graves' disease because I realized so much about when I had the disease, what I could do, and so I did a radio play, and that's on my podcast. So that's something New German medicine is amazing because it's really about body, mind. Something happens to you psychologically, and all of a sudden you've got cancer. So, and same with like gender dysphoria. I guess I just don't agree that. I think there's a lot of lousy therapists out there, to be honest. What is that? Why are they really looking back to understand what that is instead of just saying, oh yeah, that's what you got? I interviewed someone on my podcast, Walt Heyer, and he was a woman for many, many, many years and then decided to go back to being a man. And he figured out that his trauma was going to his grandmother's every week, and she would dress him in a dress. And his uncle got turned on by that, and so abused him. And so then when he went to the psychologist years later, completely confused about who he was attracted to, they said, "Oh, well, you're really actually a woman." So he believed that until he actually, what happened for Walt was he really started understanding the divine source, God, and he healed himself. That's another interesting podcast. But he's also a Walt Heyer, Heyer. That's just going back to these things is just so, to me, exciting to understand that people can heal themselves, and you can do whatever you want in your life, obviously, as an adult, but it's important to know that your roots and to go back in time. In fact, one of the things I do with patients is, holding this, I take their wrist and I take their pulse, and you can start with them at like 6 months old and go up in time, and you can find out if they've had any trauma, because you'll feel the pulse increase. So that's one way to figure out where you need to work. Maybe that's too much information. Okay, keep going, please. Okay, so everybody knows what a mitochondria is? Yeah. Okay, so the mitochondria has sources like, B vitamins, C vitamins, all the different things that the mitochondria wants. That the mitochondria are like glutathione. Glutathione, anybody know what glutathione is? I'm not going to get into all that stuff. You know what? Forget it. I'm not going to, because it just gets to be. Yes. Oh, okay. Okay. Mitochondria is the energy system in the body. And that can be helped by B vitamins and C and glutathione. And glutathione, it's interesting, I'll just say this one thing about this, is that its enzyme, if it's increased, you can tell that shows that someone has PTS. So all these systems, they're starting to read how that is influencing in your body. Okay, so we don't need to go the HPA axis, but this is why the adrenals are what the cortisol comes from. And I'm sure you all know cortisol. So it comes from the adrenals, and that's why it's important to have the adrenals be taken care of properly. You don't want to just go run, or you don't want to not sleep. You have to have your adrenals regulated so that you can have low or moderate levels of cortisol. Okay, again, I will stop. Thank you, Ali. Okay. Okay, next. Okay, this is again. So what you want to do is get the parasympathetic nervous system. And by doing that, breath work, you can actually gargling, cold water immersion, meditation, yoga, qigong. Those will all bring a lot of the GABA, which is the hormone in the parasympathetic nervous system. But if you don't want to know too much science about it, just know that you've got the sympathetic, which just charges ahead, and you've got the parasympathetic that calms everything down. So anything that's calm, like meditation, even moving slowly, just standing in place and moving slowly, you can calm things down. Okay. And this is the polyvagal chart. Okay, so you've heard of the fight or flight? Okay, so there's also freeze, right? So Stephen Porges is a psychologist, and he just talks about how community is so important to the whole, to feeling good, to having these hormones regulated, mediated. So this is all the sympathetic, which I said, and this goes into the vagus nerve, which is the parasympathetic. But there's also this dorsal vagal. And if you know people who are really shut down, they just seem unfeeling. They might not be unfeeling. They might just be frozen in the dorsal vagal. So if any of you are psychologists, or that might be interesting to you. If not, let's go on to the next slide. So yeah, just the feeling of being part of each other. I mean, I have to say that coming to Harel after, my husband died from hospital error in Los Angeles, and that's why I came back to Vancouver to be with my daughter and grandchildren. And just coming to Harel has just been amazing to me. I've made these really close friendships and, and just acquaintances, and it just helps to really feel part of a community. Because when you have, I've been in grief. My husband went into the hospital 3 years ago this month, and we got him better with homeopathy. He was on, I'll tell you that story, is that he went in because he had the DTaP vaccine. And within a month, within a day or two, his chest was burning. And then within a month, he kept breathing harder and harder until finally, one Sunday morning, we had to call the ambulance. And when we got there, he had 2 heart attacks they didn't know what was going on for him, but within 7 hours, he had 2 heart attacks. He coded for 1.5 minutes and 3 minutes. So that means he died for that amount of time. They couldn't believe that he even came back after 3 minutes. So he was on a ventilator. He was in induced coma, and he couldn't get off. They call it sedation vacation. So every morning at 7 o'clock, after a few days, they start trying to take him off the fentanyl and all the other drugs. And his respiratory rate would just climb up more than 40, so they said, no, we can't take him off these drugs. So finally, after a few days, I realized, he's having panic attacks. So he was a composer, and a lot of composers have Asperger's, and he was Asperger's. So he was very high anxiety. So he was breathing really heavy. And so I said, oh, okay, well, and then I called my friend, because I was in no shape to figure out the remedy, but it's called laurel psoriasis, which is laurel cherry, homeopathic. And so they tried again. They keep trying every morning. So once it came in, we were able to give it to him. He was able to get off the ventilator, which was amazing. He was still in a coma, and after that we knew we'd have to give him something called carbovegetalis. And we gave that to him. This is over about 5 or 6 days. And the reason I knew that he was awake was because the nurse ran out to the nurse's station where I was hanging out and said, Avi wants his phone. I said, what? He's in a coma. So I ran back in there, and he said, I've been kidnapped. They're torturing me. So I started laughing, of course, because I was just so excited and that he was back with us. So he went from the ICU to the 6th floor, to the 5th floor, to the 2nd floor. So he was progressing what we're doing. I had this woman come in. She was an anesthesiologist, but she was also an Ayurvedic doctor. And she said, here, give him this. And it was, I think it was Shilajit. Anyways, we were sneaking it into him. I mean, it's like the homeopathy, we were sneaking it into him. I found out later, actually, the director of that hospital is actually pretty cool. But so we were getting him better and better, and they said, well, now he's going to go to rehab. So he went to rehab, and to make a long story short, which is a horrible experience. I don't know what it's like here, but Los Angeles is just like a nut house. The nurse stabbed his submandibular gland, and he immediately, grew. I mean, it just, and he was in a tremendous amount of pain, and back to the hospital, and he died. He aspirated and died within 2 days. So I've been through a lot of trauma, and I think that community has been so important to me.
What was that vaccine that set it all off?
Yeah, Tdap, tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. And I have a friend whose child became severely autistic from it, and also people that have gotten MS from it. So it's not a good, they've actually taken it off from the US, but they give it to the kids in Africa. It's all in my next show. So really, it is like an abandoned house. I like this analogy because you want to balance the situation. You want to fix the foundation. You want to repair the roof. That's the first prong, the physiology. So you're balancing the biochemistry. And then the second prong is really to tell or revise the story. And so has been the experience or the psychology of this house? And that's really how I think that people do very well getting through the trauma and becoming empowered once again. So I had this man last year who had failed rehab many times. He was a gay man from New York, and his family had been patients of mine for a long time, so she got in touch with me. And basically, I was putting him on a homeopathic medicine, but the reason I have it in here is he started drawing, and he started to be able to draw the characters that had harmed him. And he's someone that you may have actually seen on television because of what had happened. He was on one of those shows, but he had a lover who had killed someone. And anyways, that was what the whole trauma was, that he couldn't stop drinking. I mean, this had gone on for 10 years, but he kept failing rehab. So, but once we really nailed the fact, I mean, he could casually say, oh yeah, that affected me, but once you go in quite deeply and with the drawings, he could really assess the fact that this is actually when things got really bad. So that's why it's so important to allow someone's creativity to come out, because they get to tell their story in a way that's not shameful, not harmful, not toxic. Okay. So I am a naturopathic medical doctor. I'm only licensed in California. They won't relicense me here, even though I'm number 50. I was number 50 at a clinic in Kitsilano. They told me that I have to take all the board exams again. And it's a lot of money, thousands of dollars, and I just said, oh, forget it. I'm just going to start running workshops, because I'm just too old to, I just didn't feel like it. So that's how I practice now, and I can practice homeopathy out of a medical group in California. So those are the things: nutrition, homeopathy, botanical medicine, hydrotherapy, visualization, counseling. People, of course, have so many different things now too, like the acupuncture or Ayurvedic, but also these, what do you call them? All the different electronics that are coming from Germany too, which are pretty incredible, but I don't do that kind of stuff. Okay. Yeah, so you're looking at, you want to make sure your blood sugar, you have to learn how to really cope with daily stresses and just become less susceptible to any type of triggers. And that is by making sure that your blood sugar is balanced, your adrenals are in good working order, the gut-brain connection, thyroid disorders. So really, you want to eat organic only because of the toxic factor. And you want to add minerals like magnesium and zinc and probiotics and prebiotics and fermented food to heal a leaky gut, which is really common when people are really in distress. A leaky gut is something that's just the gut is sort of opening up, and things can get across the gut, and then they're not broken down enough, so then the person reacts to that. Then there's CoQ10, omega-3s, glutathione, and quercetin, vitamin D. And what these will do will diminish the oxidative stress and curb that neuroinflammation that's going on in the brain. Okay. So we don't need to go into all this, but that's the inflammation. Anybody wants this PowerPoint, let me know. Okay, keep going. Yeah, and the brain foods. These foods will help the mitochondria. They create new brain cells. They help fight free radicals. And like beets, they increase the nitric oxide. And these increase the blood flow to the brain. So really great to make borscht or eat a lot of beets. Then berries all have the really high antioxidants. And so anything with, you've been told this, all the foods with color, they're antioxidant, they're anti-inflammatory, and that's because of the polyphenols. So onions and garlic have quercetin, and if you want to learn that, it's all out there. The omega-3s, the salmon, the sardines, the mackerel, the halibut. Okay. Pardon me?
They have people who are blockers, they have that out that certain vegetables.
Right, so you have to just take yourself, consider what.
Because the vitamin K causes
Yes. Right, but you're Your doctor will tell you that, so you have to consider that. Right. Yeah, that's true, Susan. Yeah. No, you can't generalize. And that's why we do individual. I do a whole food allergy charts, and we go through things very in depth. We don't just say, eat this. We understand what's going on. So these are just other things that are important. You can go on. I want to keep going. So I was telling you before that glutathione, it's a biomarker for PTS. It's the most reliable blood-based biomarker. And that's the enzyme glutathione transferase. You can go. So homeopathy is a really great way. If you know people who have trauma, it gently heals the emotional wound. It's a really beautiful way to heal. It redresses the physiological and the psychological imbalance, and it corrects the vital force. Usually when we talk about this, is like, there's so many things to tell you in this, and I don't expect you to remember or know these things, but it is important to just be able to say, oh, I know that homeopathy has been said that it can really help. And then in the botanical medicine, a really beautiful botanical to take is ashwagandha. Anybody know ashwagandha? Yeah. So it translates to the smell and the strength of a horse. But the strange thing about it, even though it creates strength and it creates resistance to stress, it's also really calming. So it's a really beautiful botanical, and you'll hear people say, oh yeah, I'm living on those, which is not a good idea, but that's the feeling it gives you because it really gives you some relief. And the other one that's really good if you have a lot of trauma is licorice, glycyrrhiza, because it'll support the adrenals. It's also antiviral, and it's also an antidepressant. Now, just like Susan said, I would not give this to someone who had hypertension. But these are all specific, and that's why when somebody comes to you, you have to know that they're an individual person that has specific needs, and not everything you're going to do is what you want to do. You have to find out what works for them. And another thing is hydrotherapy. And in the 1800s, hydrotherapy was a whole cold water movement. And it's amazing what cold water will do. Because it opposes the heat, which is the inflammation in the body. If someone has had trauma or they're experiencing that, they're going to have a hotter body than other people because there's inflammation in it. So then the cold water can really be amazing. I mean, sometimes when I can't sleep, I just put my feet in really, really cold water, and it sends me back to sleep. And those kind of tricks, and it's free, right? Well, except for your water bill, but you know. And it really calms the adrenal glands. It's a really beautiful thing. People going into the ocean, you come out just feeling very calm, and that's why, because everything is just basically cooled out. So it's just, the major thing about trauma is just feeling that helplessness, that shame is left behind. And this next part is really more about the creative part, which is so important. It gets left out of our healing, right? And, you know, consider that psychiatry offers only drugs, and 2 of 5 suicides, people are taking prescribed drugs. Psychotherapy, not all psychotherapy works for all people. And when patients are stuck in that vicious cycle where the prefrontal cortex dominates, is dysfunctional, and the amygdala predominates, we have to understand that this helplessness will lead to self-hate, to addiction, to cutting, to sabotaging yourself. And so that if you can tap into the creative forces of imagery or art, music, sound, writing, movement, drama, and that will empower the patient to tell their story, but not necessarily the event. I can't dwell on that enough, because sometimes you can't take them back to the event. They don't want to hear about it, but you take back that feeling, that energy that they've had, and you make a story from it. So the truth is that imagery, the nervous system can't really tell the difference between a real and an imagined event. So one way to transform symptoms of PTS is to change the channel. And just as I've been saying, because we need to stop running that movie that's in our head that continues on and on. And so I do that a lot. I mean, I think that's one area that we really we don't utilize it, and it's so powerful. But we really need to replace the visual and the audio of the real trauma with our own creativity that can lead you back to being calm and centered. And so, storytelling, and that inner work, you could, psychodrama, playback theater, dream revision, all these womb exercises in my trauma book. And there's just so many ways to explore your story and create your own story. But anybody is creative. People say, oh, I'm not creative, I can't sing, I can't do this. It's not true. We're told these things that are not true. Every single person in here has a way to tell their story, whether it is writing, whether it's journal writing, whether it's writing a story, a novel, whether it's dancing, whether it's acting, whether it's making sculpture. And one thing that I just wanted to impart was the fact of the still point is that quiet place inside, that center, which we get with meditation. And the way to do this step by step is you find a safe and quiet environment, and you do the breath work, whether it's 4 breaths in, 8 breaths out, and you can do either just simple contemplation, like just sitting there and just, maybe you're by a brook or maybe you're inside your house. It's just a very calm place, and you're just sitting there doing nothing at all, not even trying to train your mind, your thoughts at all. Another way is just beginning that rhythm of the breath work and diaphragmatic breathing. There's different types of breathing you can learn. Or you can just sit quietly, or you can move or dance in slow motion. And just by people might, wonder what you're doing, but who cares? You just feel that sense of calm that comes over you, and you learn to cultivate that. So you tell the story, and you cultivate calm. Yeah. And as I said, you tap into the 5 senses. There's these different ways to use guided imagery. So there's just so many ways to do things. And even the sense of smell, even if you can just get some lavender, that will really change your brain. It's just, you can't sleep. You're very agitated. That's okay. That's okay. But there's lavender, there's lang-lang, there's just so many different beautiful botanicals that you can just sniff. And then there's sound healing. These are Tibetan prayer bowls. And that sound healing, we don't use that. And yet that can even apparently kind of get rid of the Alzheimer plaques. So there's all this amazing research that's coming that we may have known for a long time, but now they have the research to show you exactly that this is really helpful. And then, of course, music affects the limbic system, and that's, the amygdala's in that, and the hypothalamus. And so even if you just find a mantra, like an Om every day, or you're meditating, or all the way up to composing music. But you can, yeah. So in this, just reframe and recreate is really something I want you to remember, those words, because telling the story can be so important. It can also be, as I said, too traumatic, and there's no right way to do this. You have to get a sense of how you feel comfortable. You don't need to return to the scene of the crime, although sometimes people will, and they need to. It just all depends on people's level of safety. So basically, you want to create a safe and interesting. It's really important to say interesting, because the mind is not, if it's boring, the mind is not going to go further. It's not going to be interested. So you create a safe and interesting context where the prefrontal cortex can increasingly come online to regulate the amygdala, breaking the vicious cycle of primitive brain responses and reducing the traumatic response. So the visual arts, the expressive arts are, of course, writing, visual art, music, vocalization, movement and dance, and acting. And in acting, solo shows are really popular. I'm sure they're popular in Vancouver, but I was part of the solo show in Los Angeles, so people are doing solo shows just to be able to tell their story of their lifetime, all the things that, whatever. Remember this one woman, she created a closet because she would always run to the closet because she was so scared of her mother. And by doing that, she really broke out of the memories that were so bad for her. Yeah, so anyways, that's the book I wrote when, as my practice got more and more with people who had been traumatized, had been sexually abused. I've dealt with so many addicts, and that whole thing of it's always about something that happened that didn't feel good inside, and you have to go and balance the biochemistry, help them with the food, so allergies, all that kind of thing, put them on certain supplements, maybe vitamin D, and then also tell the story. So that's what I did after having had all these patients. And it's weird because when I wrote this, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just writing and writing and writing and writing, and then I had to put it all in shape. And all of a sudden, when I made this story, I saw my father, my mother, my brother, and you wouldn't really know that it was, but you knew that it was, you know what I mean? It's like sort of a dream, but I was able to really see how I felt about all these people. It was just very interesting to me. And so, yeah, so just imagine art, but also just like North Vancouver is so beautiful, just seeing nature, just being able to look at it, be able to be in nature, what that does for your whole parasympathetic nervous system and bringing out the GABA. And then it's a friend of mine's painting that's, I think she was in Paris somewhere, I think. So painting and drawing and some things that I have absolutely no idea, no good at, but it's so amazing to watch people who can paint and draw and how they just feel very empowered by that and they can tell their whole story. And then that was a cover we did in Meshuggah here, actually at the Fringe. Gosh, that must be 30 years ago. And that was the poster for it. So all the things that you can do with music, you can listen, you can play, you can sing, you can dance, you can compose if you're my husband, or you can perform. And then this was my solo show. It's called Hidden, and that was about my sexual assault, as I said. And now the next one, I'm just finishing up. It's called The Music Stopped on Valentine's Day, because he died on Valentine's Day. And it's a homage to there's a lot of vocal tunes and him playing the piano that are interspersed in the story of how he died. So it was intense, and thank goodness for Josie and Joanne and Allie, and really helped me, support me, because it's obviously not an easy task. This has been pretty intense. And I think that's pretty well it. Okay, so that's my website, that's my email. I'm gonna be doing workshops, probably here. I'm also a member of SAG, as an actor and voice actor. And I'm licensed in California, but I can't get licensed here. And that's a workshop, those are the books, those are the musicals, and that's my podcast. So if you want to get on my podcast list, please give me your email, and I'll certainly be happy to do that. And then just a thank you very much to Noga and Harel and everyone who's attended. So thanks everybody for listening. And for Tim Newman and my old former Yiddish teacher, Haya, and Ali for setting it up, and Josie she's such a tech whiz. Yeah, so thank you. So now it's time for questions.